The Star Trek original series episode, Is There in Truth No Beauty?, introduced the Vulcan philosophical concept of infinite diversity and infinite combination. It could be summed up as an ideal based on learning to delight in the essential differences of others, as well as learning to recognize our similarities. As a queer nerd who loves both Star Trek and role-playing games like Dungeons & Dragons, I have met many people who agree with this notion. But unfortunately, I've also encountered a lot of folks who try to use the idea to justify their own hatred and bigotry. And I have some thoughts on that. Welcome to Indeterminate Infinities, where we discuss multifarious aspects of the art of game mastering. My name is Gene. I am a professional writer and information architect who has been DMing for 49 years, and who also has a degree in mathematics because nerding out about countable infinities, uncountable infinities, transfinite numbers, and related subjects is one of my favorite logical jams. As I said, the Vulcan philosophy of infinite diversity and infinite combinations, hereinafter referred to as, or abbreviated as, IDIC, was introduced in a Star Trek original series episode. Some bigots who want to elbow their way into fanish activities try to argue that we can't exclude them from our gaming tables or convention events or chat servers or parties because infinite diversity must include their racist beliefs or misogynist beliefs or transphobic beliefs or homophobic beliefs or their hatred of certain religious groups and so on. Because infinite diversity, they claim, requires that all opinions must be included. Some of them seem to operate under the assumption that because IDIC is a Vulcan belief, that it's like a mathematical theorem or a rule of formal logic, because Vulcan culture is based on logic. If you're one of those people, I am not at all sorry to be the one to break this to you. The planet Vulcan, the Vulcan race, including Mr. Spock, and the entire Star Trek franchise are all fictional. They aren't real. And nobody who is real has produced a mathematical or logical proof that IDIC is real and applies to the real world. It represents an ideal that many people do believe. But that's all it is. Even if IDIC were some sort of mathematical law, infinity doesn't mean what these people think it means. The German mathematician Georg Cantor first published a proof in 1874 that not all infinities in math are the same size. Specifically, he proved that several of the infinite sets of numbers that mathematicians could define were the same size as each other. The elements of those sets could all be mapped on a one-to-one basis to the set of natural numbers, also called the counting numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, ... forever. His proof also showed that a bunch of other infinite sets of numbers that mathematicians could define could not be mapped on a one-to-one basis with the counting numbers. There was much left over. And that these other infinities sets were therefore bigger than any of those that could be mapped to the counting numbers. This is the origin of the concept of countable infinities versus uncountable infinities. And it wasn't just Cantor. Richard Dedekind, another German mathematician, formulated a more simplified proof of the concept of countable infinities. Unfortunately, before he published it, he had outlined the general idea of the proof in private correspondence with Cantor, who failed to credit him with the idea in his publication, which led to a permanent falling out between them. Regardless, both proofs are still valid mathematical constructions that remain as important foundations to many, I'm not going to say infinitely many, but many different branches of mathematics and mathematical philosophy. In 1894, Cantor published another paper using a completely different set of mathematical principles, usually referred to as his diagonal proof, which proved the existence of mathematical sets larger than the countable infinities. The upshot of this is that you can have an infinity that doesn't include everything. The counting numbers, 1, 2, 3, and so on, are infinite, but they do not include the square root of 2, for example. They do not include pi. They do not include any of the negative numbers. There are literally an infinite number of numbers which we can define that absolutely are not part of the counting numbers, yet the counting numbers themselves are an infinite set. So, even if we espouse the philosophy of IDIC, we don't have to include haters, because you don't have to include everything to be infinite. Stepping away from logic. If I'm holding a social event in my home and someone who comes to that event starts calling one or more of the other guests nasty names and saying that they should be executed, or at least hated and ridiculed by everyone else, I have every right to kick them out of my home. The same holds true if I'm hosting a party at my hotel room at a convention, or hosting an approved event at a convention, or if I'm hosting a chat on my own server, or if I'm running an RPG game. The thing that the bigots and their apologists don't understand is that tolerance is not an absolute rule. Tolerance is a peace treaty. If a country that has entered into a peace treaty with one of its neighbors later militarily attacks that neighbor, it can't legally object to the neighbor fighting back in self-defense, and because they're not abiding by the treaty. Tolerance works the same way. You are only entitled to tolerance and acceptance as long as you treat everyone else with tolerance and acceptance. If you're saying hateful things to someone, or advocating for harming someone, or actually causing harm to someone, and we kick you out of our game, or party, or event, we are not being rude. We are not violating our own principles about acceptance. We are practicing self-defense and defense of others. In fact, the only way to defend tolerance and a tolerant society is to exercise the right to not tolerate acts of intolerance and those who refuse to stop committing them. For more information on this concept, look up the paradox of tolerance, which was first espoused by philosopher Karl Popper in 1945. What does this have to do with fantasy game mastering, you may ask? If you're a game master, treating your players fairly is part of your job, and that means treating them with respect. It also means fostering an environment at your table where players who are treating their fellow players with respect feel welcome. The first step in doing that is being welcoming yourself. This happens to be Pride Month, which is one reason why I'm covering this topic today. Being accepted for who we are and enjoying the same civil rights as everyone else is still an issue that those of us who fall under any part of the LGBTQ+ label have to deal with on a daily basis. If you specifically think sexual orientation or gender identity have nothing to do with game mastering, I must point out that I have never been to an RPG table, whether as a DM, player, or even observer, where there wasn't at least one player character interested in romancing or seducing an NPC, or flirting with or otherwise starting a romance with another player character. If you have a male PC who tries to flirt with a female barmaid, you have sexual orientation active at your table. So, haters and bigots aren't welcome at my table or at my events. And that includes any of you who feel tempted to go into the comments to tell me how much you don't care about other people's identities. If you really didn't care, you would never feel the urge to tell us in no uncertain terms that you don't care. Denial is not just a river in Egypt. It is a condition alive and well in every person who has ever insisted that they don't care about other people's sexual or gender identities, and therefore we shouldn't bring it up. And that is where I'm going to leave it. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please click the thumbs up button and/or consider sharing the video. Click subscribe to be notified when new videos are uploaded. The comments are open, but I am ready and willing to use the moderation tools on anyone who misbehaves. Until next time, keep dreaming.